At Thanksgiving dinner, my family called me a failure, laughed at my computer games, and told me I'd never amount to anything. 3 days earlier, I had sold my startup for $50 million, but they had no clue. Instead of telling them the truth, I decided to test just how cruel they could be to someone they thought was worthless. Once I was done, half my family wasn't speaking to me, and the other half was begging for forgiveness. This is how I got the ultimate revenge on the people who never believed in me. My name is Alex, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the black sheep of the Wilson family. While my sister Jessica was winning debate tournaments and getting into Harvard Law, I was in my bedroom writing code and building websites for local businesses. While my cousins were playing football and dating cheerleaders, I was learning programming languages and dreaming about the next big tech breakthrough. My family never understood me. To them, computers were just expensive toys, and programming was something antisocial weirdos did in their basements. My dad, Robert, owned a successful accounting firm and constantly reminded me that real business happens with real people, not screens. My mom, Linda, worked as a nurse and worried that I'd never find a wife because I spent too much time playing with computers instead of developing social skills. The family dynamics were pretty clear-cut. Jessica was the golden child who could do no wrong. She graduated summa cum laude from Harvard, landed a job at a prestigious corporate law firm, married another lawyer named David, and bought a beautiful house in the suburbs. Every family gathering became an opportunity for my parents to brag about her latest promotion or her husband's recent courtroom victory. Then there was me, 28 years old, college dropout, no girlfriend, living in a tiny apartment above a coffee shop, driving a beat-up Honda Civic that made concerning noises. To them, I was the cautionary tale, the son who had so much potential but chose to waste it on unrealistic dreams. What they didn't know was that I had been building something incredible for the past 3 years. It started as a side project while I was working part-time at a local computer repair shop. I noticed that small businesses were struggling with inventory management, constantly running out of popular items while overstocking things that didn't sell. So I created an AI-powered prediction system that could analyze sales patterns, weather data, local events, and dozens of other factors to predict exactly what businesses should order and when. I called it InventiFlow, and it was revolutionary. I beta tested it with a few local restaurants and retail stores, and their profits increased by an average of 30% within the first month. Word started spreading through the business community, and soon I had companies from 3 states wanting to use my system. But I kept quiet about it. I worked on it nights and weekends, slowly building the user base, improving the algorithms, and hiring a small team of remote developers. I registered the company under a generic LLC name and operated everything from my tiny apartment. To my family, I was still just Alex, the aimless computer geek who couldn't hold down a real job. The success happened faster than I ever imagined. Within 2 years, InventiFlow was processing millions of dollars in inventory decisions for over 500 businesses. I was approached by venture capitalists, offered partnerships with major corporations, and featured in several tech industry publications under a pseudonym. The money started rolling in, but I lived the same modest lifestyle. I didn't want the attention, and I certainly didn't want my family's sudden interest. That all changed 3 days before Thanksgiving, when my phone rang at 2 a.m. It was Marcus Chen, the acquisition director from a major tech corporation. "Alex, we've been watching InventiFlow for months. We want to buy you out. $50 million cash, with a 5-year consulting contract worth another $10 million. Are you interested?" I was interested. Very interested. The next 72 hours were a whirlwind of lawyers, contracts, due diligence, and wire transfers. On Tuesday evening, exactly 1 day before Thanksgiving, I signed the papers that officially made me $50 million richer. I sat in my tiny apartment, staring at my bank balance on my laptop screen, and laughed until I cried. Then Thanksgiving dinner happened, and everything changed forever. Thanksgiving at my parents' house was always a production. Mum spent days preparing the perfect meal, Dad polished his good china, and Jessica arrived with expensive wine and stories about her latest legal victories. This year felt different from the moment I walked in the door. "Alex!" my mom called out, wiping her hands on her apron. "You look thin. Are you eating enough? I worry about you living alone in that little apartment." Before I could answer, my dad appeared with his usual disapproving expression. "Did you finally find a real job, son? Or are you still messing around with those computer projects?" I had been dealing with these comments my entire adult life, but today they hit differently. Yesterday, I had more money in my bank account than he had made in his entire career, yet here he was treating me like a child who couldn't figure out his life. Jessica arrived an hour later with David, both of them looking like they had stepped out of a magazine. She hugged me with that patronizing smile she had perfected over the years. "Hey, little brother, still living the bachelor life, I see. David was just saying we should set you up with someone from his firm, maybe a nice paralegal who could help you get your life together." My Uncle Mike and Aunt Sarah showed up with their twin sons, both college athletes who looked at me like I was some exotic creature they couldn't quite understand. "Uncle Alex still doing the computer stuff?" one of them asked, not bothering to hide his smirk. The real humiliation began during dinner. Dad had this tradition of going around the table and having everyone share what they were thankful for and what they had accomplished that year. Jessica went first, naturally. "I'm thankful for my family, my health, and the incredible opportunity to make partner at the firm next year," she announced, beaming. "David and I also closed on the lake house we've been wanting, and we're planning to start trying for kids soon." Everyone applauded. Mom actually teared up with pride. David went next, talking about his recent $2 million settlement and the new BMW he had treated himself to. Uncle Mike bragged about his construction company landing a major government contract. Aunt Sarah talked about her charity work and their upcoming European vacation. Then all eyes turned to me. "Alex," Dad said, raising his eyebrows expectantly. "What about you? Any developments in your life?" The table went quiet. I could feel everyone staring at me, waiting for me to stumble through some pathetic update about my non-existent love life or my hobby projects. "Well," I began, "I've been working on some software development projects. Business has been good." Uncle Mike snorted. "Software development, that's a fancy way of saying unemployed, right?" The table erupted in laughter. Even my mom chuckled, though she tried to hide it behind her napkin. "Now, Mike," Dad said, but he was grinning too. "Alex is exploring his options. Some people take longer to figure out what they want to do with their lives." "I'm just saying," Mike continued, "at his age, I already owned my own business and had 2 kids. Maybe it's time to put away the video games and join the real world." That's when Dad stood up and tapped his wine glass. "Actually, since we're on the topic, I'd like to make a toast," he announced, his voice carrying that condescending tone I knew so well. "To my son Alex, who at 28 years old still believes he's going to be the next Steve Jobs with his computer games. Here's hoping that someday he'll discover what the rest of us learned long ago. Success comes from hard work in the real world, not fantasy projects." Everyone raised their glasses and laughed. Jessica smirked. David shook his head like he felt sorry for me. The twins looked genuinely confused about why anyone would waste their time on computers. I sat there staring at my plate, listening to my own family mock everything I had worked for. The same family that had no idea I had just sold my fantasy project for more money than all of them would make in their combined lifetimes. That's the moment I made my decision. Instead of defending myself, instead of revealing the truth, I was going to test them. I wanted to see just how cruel they could be to someone they thought was worthless. I wanted to know who these people really were when they thought I had nothing to offer them. The revenge I was planning would be sweeter than anything I could have said in that moment. 3 days after Thanksgiving, I put my plan into motion. I crafted a story about my failed startup that would sound believable to people who already expected me to fail. According to my story, I had invested everything into a software project that had just collapsed, leaving me $15,000 in debt with no income and facing eviction from my apartment. Each family member would get the same story, the same request for help, and I would document their responses. Only then would I know who deserved to be part of my new life as a multimillionaire. Dad was my first call. "Robert Wilson speaking," he answered in his professional voice, even though he knew it was me. "Dad, I need to talk to you about something serious," I began, making sure my voice carried the right amount of stress and embarrassment. I explained how my startup had burned through all my savings, how the investors had pulled out at the last minute, and how I was now facing financial ruin. The silence on the other end stretched uncomfortably long. "Alex," he finally said, his voice heavy with disappointment, "this is exactly what I was afraid of. This is why I've been telling you for years to get a stable job with benefits." "I know, Dad. You were right, but right now I just need help getting back on my feet. I need about $15,000 to cover my debts and rent until I can find a regular job. Another long pause. Son, your mother and I have been planning our retirement for years. We can't just dip into those funds because you made poor financial decisions. This is a hard lesson, but maybe it's one you needed to learn. The lecture that followed lasted 20 minutes. He talked about responsibility, consequences, and the importance of having a backup plan. Not once did he offer any actual help. Maybe this will finally motivate you to apply for that bank position I mentioned, he concluded. They're always looking for people with basic computer skills. Mom's response was equally crushing, but in a different way. Oh, honey, she said when I called her later that day. I'm so sorry this happened, but you know your father controls our finances and he's very strict about our budget. I thought maybe you could talk to him, I suggested. Explain that this is an emergency. Alex, sweetheart, you have to understand his perspective. He's worked his whole life to build security for our retirement. He can't risk that on. She trailed off. On what, Mom? On something that might not work out. You have to admit your track record with these computer projects hasn't been great. The fact that she had no idea about my track record because she had never bothered to ask about my work didn't seem to occur to her. Jessica's reaction was perhaps the most painful because it came wrapped in false sympathy. Oh my God, Alex, that's terrible, she said when I called her at her law office. I mean, I kind of saw this coming, but I hoped I was wrong. You saw it coming? Well, you've been doing this startup thing for years without any real success. I kept thinking you'd eventually get a stable job, but... She sighed dramatically. Look, David and I are in a really tight spot right now. We just put down a deposit on the lake house and we're trying to build our emergency fund before we start having kids. I wouldn't ask if I wasn't desperate, Jess. I know, and I feel terrible saying no. But $15,000 is a lot of money, especially when there's no guarantee you'll be able to pay it back. Maybe this is the universe telling you it's time to try something different? She suggested I move back in with our parents, apply for retail jobs, and maybe take some business classes to learn how real companies work. Uncle Mike was brutally direct when I reached him that evening. Kid, I'm going to give it to you straight, he said. I've been in business for 20 years, and I can smell a bad investment from a mile away. You've been playing with computers your whole life instead of learning real skills. It's not playing, Uncle Mike. I built a legitimate software company. And where is it now? Gone. Because you don't understand business fundamentals. You want my advice? Get a construction job. Learn what it means to work with your hands. Stop chasing these get-rich-quick schemes. The conversation ended with him telling me that giving me money would be enabling my delusions. Aunt Sarah was somehow even worse. She spent 10 minutes explaining how opportunities like this are character-building experiences and suggested I use this time to reevaluate my priorities and maybe find a nice girl to settle down with. Sarah, I'm facing eviction. I need practical help, not life advice. And that's exactly your problem, Alex. You're always looking for shortcuts instead of building a foundation. David went to law school. Jessica went to law school. Your father built his accounting practice slowly and responsibly. You can't just expect success to happen overnight with some computer program. The irony was suffocating. Here was a woman who had never worked a day in her life, living off her husband's inheritance, lecturing me about building success. David, Jessica's husband, was polite but firm when I called him as a last resort. Alex, man, I wish I could help, but Jessica and I have a strict budget. Plus, honestly, I think enabling this behavior isn't going to help you long term. Maybe it's time to consider law school. I could put in a good word for you at some programs. 7 family members, 7 rejections, 7 lectures about my poor life choices and unrealistic dreams. These were the same people who had spent years borrowing my time, my skills, and my money whenever they needed computer help, tax advice, or someone to house-sit their expensive homes. Uncle Mike had asked me to design his company website for free. Jessica had begged me to fix her laptop the night before the bar exam. Dad had insisted I handle their home network setup and troubleshooting for years. But when I needed help, when they thought I was genuinely struggling, not one of them stepped up. The test was complete and the results were exactly what I had feared but needed to confirm. For 2 weeks, I lived with the crushing weight of my family's rejection. Their words echoed in my head during the day, and their dismissive laughter haunted my sleep. but I also felt a strange sense of clarity. The test had worked exactly as I intended, revealing truths I needed to face about the people I had spent my life trying to please. During this time, I kept up the charade of my failed life. I posted on social media about job hunting and financial stress. I declined family invitations, claiming I was too embarrassed about my situation to socialize. Meanwhile, I was quietly working with financial advisors to manage my $50 million windfall and planning my next moves. Everything changed on a Tuesday morning in December. I was sitting in a coffee shop pretending to work on job applications when my phone started buzzing with notifications. First a text from Jessica, then one from Mom, then Dad, then Uncle Mike. All variations of the same message. Is this you? Opening my laptop, I discovered what had triggered the flood of messages. TechCrunch had published a major feature story titled The $50 million AI Inventory Revolution, How a 28-year-old Dropout Built the Future of Retail Prediction. The article included my full name, a photo of me from the acquisition announcement, and detailed coverage of Inventiflow's impact on the retail industry. The story was everywhere. Business Insider picked it up within an hour. Forbes published a follow-up piece calling me the millennial entrepreneur who outsmarted Silicon Valley giants. Local news stations were already calling, wanting interviews with Portland's tech prodigy. My phone rang immediately. Mom's contact photo filled the screen. "Alex!" she practically shouted when I answered. "Why didn't you tell us? We had no idea you were so successful. The whole family is calling me asking about this article." "About what article?" I asked innocently. "The one about your company. $50 million, Alex. My son sold his company for $50 million. She was crying happy tears, her voice filled with pride that had been completely absent 2 weeks earlier. "Oh, that," I said casually. "Yeah, that happened a few weeks ago." "A few weeks ago? Alex, this is the most incredible news. Your father is going to be so proud. We have to celebrate. We have to tell everyone." The speed of her transformation was nauseating. 2 weeks earlier, she couldn't spare a few $1,000s to help her supposedly struggling son. Now she was ready to throw a parade. Jessica called 30 minutes later, her lawyer voice in full effect. "Alex, I just saw the news. This is absolutely incredible. I always knew you had it in you. David and I were just talking about how we never doubted your vision." "Really? Because when I called you 2 weeks ago asking for help, you said you kind of saw my failure coming." Silence stretched between us. When she spoke again, her tone was more careful. "That was different. You said your startup had failed. We had no idea you had another project that was so successful. You should have told us about Inventiflow." "Should I have? Would it have mattered?" "Of course it would have mattered. Alex, we're family. Your success is our success. We should be celebrating together." Dad's call came that evening. His voice carried a forced joviality that I had never heard before. "Son, I owe you an apology. I clearly didn't understand the scope of what you were building. This Inventiflow system sounds revolutionary. I should have listened more carefully when you tried to explain your work." "When did I try to explain my work, Dad? When did you ever ask about what I was actually doing?" "Well, I just assumed. Look, the important thing is that you've achieved something incredible. We should sit down and talk about investment strategies, tax implications. I have some ideas about how to manage this kind of wealth." The conversation continued for an hour, with him offering unsolicited financial advice and suggesting ways he could help me properly handle my money. Not once did he acknowledge the cruelty of his Thanksgiving toast or his refusal to help when he thought I was struggling. Uncle Mike's approach was perhaps the most transparent in its opportunism. "Alex, buddy, I had no idea you were working on something so big. You know, I've been thinking about expanding my construction business into commercial real estate. With your tech background and my industry experience, we could make a killing together. I'm talking about a real partnership here." This from the man who had told me I needed to learn real skills and stop chasing get-rich-quick schemes. The most pathetic response came from Aunt Sarah, who left a 20-minute voicemail explaining how she had always believed in my potential and how the family should come together to support each other's dreams. She mentioned 3 separate business ideas she thought I should fund and suggested hosting a family celebration at her country club. Within 48 hours of the article's publication, I had received calls, texts, emails, and social media messages from every family member who had rejected my plea for help. They all followed the same script: disbelief at my success, claims that they had always believed in me, and sudden availability to provide any support I might need. None of them acknowledged their previous rejections. None of them seemed to remember telling me to abandon my fantasy projects and get a real job. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. The local news attention escalated quickly. Portland Business Journal wanted a cover story. The mayor's office called about recognition ceremonies. Oregon State University, which I had dropped out of, suddenly wanted to offer me an honorary degree and invite me to speak at graduation. Through it all, my family's attempts to insert themselves into my success story became increasingly desperate. Mom started telling reporters that she had always encouraged Alex's entrepreneurial spirit. Dad claimed he had provided crucial guidance during the early development phases. Jessica began describing herself as my business advisor to her law firm colleagues. The lies were so brazen, so completely detached from reality that I almost admired their audacity. But I was done playing their game. The test was over, and now it was time for the results. The breaking point came when Jessica called me for the third time that week, this time with what she called an exciting opportunity. Alex, David, and I have been talking, and we want to bring you in on an investment opportunity. There's this amazing law firm in Seattle that's looking for tech-savvy partners. With your money and our legal expertise, we could own a piece of the future of legal technology. How much are you looking for? I asked, already knowing where this was headed. Well, the initial investment is $2 million, but the potential returns are incredible. Think of it as family helping family build generational wealth together. $2 million. The same person who couldn't spare $15,000 to help her supposedly desperate brother was now asking for $2 million to fund her husband's career ambitions. Jessica, do you remember what you told me 3 weeks ago when I asked for help? Alex, that was completely different. You said your company had failed. We had no idea about Inventiflow. So you only help family members who are already successful? The line went quiet for a long moment. That's not fair, Alex. You're twisting my words. Am I? Because it sounds like you're only interested in a relationship with me now that you know I have money. After hanging up, I made my decision. It was time to draw clear lines about who deserved to be part of my new life. I started with a family group text that went to everyone who had rejected my request for help. Hi everyone. I know there's been a lot of excitement about the recent news coverage. I wanted to let you all know that I'll be taking some time to focus on my next ventures and won't be available for investment opportunities, business partnerships, or financial assistance requests. I hope you understand. The responses came within minutes. Dad: Son, I think we should talk about this in person. There might be some misunderstandings to clear up. Mom: Alex, honey, you sound upset. Whatever's bothering you, we can work through it as a family. Jessica: This seems like an overreaction. Can we have lunch this week and discuss things rationally? Uncle Mike: Kid, don't let success go to your head. Family is more important than money. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. These were the same people who had lectured me about consequences and responsibility when they thought I was broke. Now that I had money, suddenly everything was negotiable. But I wasn't done. Over the next month, I systematically removed each of them from my life in ways that made my message crystal clear. When Dad called offering to help me invest wisely, I told him I had hired professionals who actually understood modern finance, unlike someone whose business model hadn't changed since 1985. When he protested that he was just trying to help, I reminded him of his exact words: "We can't just dip into those funds because you made poor financial decisions." "That's not what I meant," he stammered. "That's exactly what you meant. And now that I don't need your help, you don't get to offer it." Mom's attempts at reconciliation were more emotional but equally transparent. She invited me to Sunday dinner, just to spend time together as a family. When I declined, she showed up at my apartment with homemade cookies and tears in her eyes. "Alex, I don't understand why you're shutting us out. We love you and we're proud of you." Where was that love when I called asking for help? Where was that pride at Thanksgiving dinner when Dad made his toast? We made mistakes, but family forgives each other. That's what love means. Love means being there when someone needs you, not just when they have something you want. She left the cookies and walked away crying, but I felt no guilt. These tears were for the relationship she wanted now, not the one she had neglected for years. Jessica's persistence was the most annoying. She kept trying to schedule family time and sent long texts about how success shouldn't change who I was. Finally, I sent her a detailed response. Jessica, you told me you kind of saw my failure coming and suggested I move back in with our parents and apply for retail jobs. You said I didn't understand how real companies work. You refused to help because there was no guarantee I'd be able to pay it back. Those weren't mistakes. They revealed who you really are. I'm not interested in pretending otherwise now that the situation has changed. Her response was immediate and furious. You're being incredibly petty. This is not who you are, Alex. Money is changing you. I replied with just 4 words. Money is revealing everyone. Uncle Mike tried a different approach, showing up at my new office uninvited to have a man-to-man conversation. Look, Alex, I was tough on you because I wanted you to succeed. Sometimes you have to break a man down to build him back up stronger. You weren't trying to build me up, Mike. You were protecting your investment. You saw me as a bad risk, so you wrote me off. That's business, right? Well, now I'm writing you off. That's not how family works. You're right. Family helps each other when times are tough. Business relationships only work when both sides benefit. Guess which category our relationship falls into? The most satisfying rejection came when Aunt Sarah tried to reconnect through my mother, suggesting we put this unpleasantness behind us and focus on healing the family. I had Mom deliver a simple message. Tell Sarah that I learned about character building experiences from her advice. Being rejected by family when I needed help was exactly the kind of character building experience she recommended. I'm grateful for the lesson. Within 6 months, I had effectively cut off contact with everyone who had failed my test. I changed my phone number, moved to a beautiful house in the hills outside Portland, and built a life surrounded by people who had known me before the money, my real friends from the tech community, former colleagues who had supported my dreams, and new relationships built on genuine connection rather than financial opportunity. The transformation was liberating. For the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to prove myself to people who would never truly see my worth. 6 months after cutting ties with my family, I was sitting in my new home office overlooking the Columbia River when my phone rang with an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered, Alex? It's Mom. Her voice was small, defeated in a way I had never heard before. How did you get this number? I hired a private investigator. Please don't hang up. I need to tell you something. I almost ended the call immediately, but something in her tone made me pause. Your father and I are getting divorced, she continued quickly, as if afraid I would disconnect. It turns out he's been hiding money from me for years, secret accounts, investments I never knew about. When I asked him for help for you, he told me we couldn't afford it, but we could have. He just didn't think you were worth the risk. The revelation hit me harder than I expected. Dad had money the entire time, but had chosen to watch his son struggle rather than help. I'm so sorry, Alex. I should have fought harder for you. I should have stood up to him. I was a coward, and I lost my son because of it. Why are you telling me this? Because I want you to know that some of us are capable of learning from our mistakes. I'm not asking for anything except maybe the chance to prove that I can be better. We talked for another hour. She told me about discovering Dad's deception, about realizing how many times she had enabled his control over the family finances, about the shame she felt for prioritizing his approval over her children's needs. It was the most honest conversation we had ever had. I didn't forgive her immediately, but I agreed to meet for coffee the following week. It was the beginning of a slow, careful rebuilding of our relationship based on honesty rather than obligation. Dad never acknowledged his deception. Even after Mom exposed his hidden assets during the divorce proceedings, he maintained that he had been financially prudent and that giving me money would have been enabling irresponsible behavior. He remarried within a year to a woman 20 years younger and continued telling people that his son's success had gone to his head. Jessica made several attempts to reconcile over the years, usually coinciding with times when her law firm was struggling or she needed connections in the tech industry. Each overture followed the same pattern: initial contrition, followed by subtle requests for favors, ending with accusations that I was holding grudges when I declined to help. Uncle Mike's construction business went under 2 years later. He reached out through mutual friends, claiming he wanted to rebuild our family bond. but every conversation somehow turned to his financial struggles and the opportunities we could pursue together. When I didn't take the bait, he told people I had become arrogant and forgotten where I came from. Aunt Sarah began introducing herself at social events as the aunt of that tech millionaire. She created elaborate stories about her role in my success and tried to leverage my name for status in her social circles. When I heard about this through mutual acquaintances, I had my lawyer send a cease and desist letter. She never contacted me directly again. The real revelation came in rebuilding my life without them. I discovered what genuine relationships actually felt like. My old friends from the tech community celebrated my success without immediately calculating what it meant for them. They were excited about my achievements, curious about my future plans, and continued treating me exactly the same as they always had. When I offered to invest in their startups or help with their projects, it came from genuine desire to support people I cared about, not obligation or manipulation. I also learned the joy of anonymous generosity. I established a foundation that provided emergency financial assistance to struggling entrepreneurs. I funded scholarships for first-generation college students pursuing computer science degrees. I bought my old coffee shop where I had spent countless hours working on Inventiflow and made sure the employees received living wages and full benefits. Maria Santos was a financial advisor who had been assigned to help me manage my wealth. Unlike everyone else in my life, she had no idea about my family drama or my past struggles. She saw me simply as a client who needed guidance navigating sudden wealth. Over months of working together, we developed a friendship based on shared values and genuine compatibility. When our professional relationship eventually evolved into something personal, I knew it had nothing to do with my money and everything to do with who I was as a person. Maria often reminded me that cutting off toxic family members wasn't cruel. It was necessary for my mental health and future happiness. You can't change people who don't want to change, she would say, but you can choose who gets access to your life. 3 years after my Thanksgiving revelation, I can honestly say I'm happier than I've ever been. I wake up each morning excited about the projects I'm working on, surrounded by people who value me for who I am rather than what I can provide them. The money gave me financial freedom, but cutting off my family gave me something more valuable, emotional freedom. I no longer waste energy trying to prove my worth to people who will never truly see it. I don't carry the stress of one-sided relationships or the resentment of unreciprocated support. Sometimes people ask if I ever regret the way I handled things. They suggest that family should forgive and forget, that holding grudges is unhealthy, that money shouldn't change relationships. Those people misunderstand what actually happened. The money didn't change my family. It revealed who they had always been. They were perfectly content to dismiss my dreams, mock my ambitions, and ignore my struggles as long as they thought I had nothing to offer them. The moment they discovered I had value, they came running back with open arms and outstretched hands. Real love doesn't work that way. Real love shows up when things are difficult, not just when they're profitable. My advice to anyone facing similar situations is simple. Pay attention to how people treat you when they think you have nothing to give them. That's when you see their true character. Once you see it clearly, believe it. Some relationships are worth fighting for, others are worth walking away from. The difference between the two will determine the quality of your entire life. If this story had you hooked, make sure to like this video and subscribe to Crazy Stories Library for more exciting stories like this. Hit that notification bell so you'll be the first to know when I upload. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.